All right, everybody, welcome back to Duck Dynasty, the Unraveler edition with Willie, also known as William Vincent, and myself, Alan Bondar, the Unraveler. Super excited to be back with you again. We had such a great time last week, and I cannot wait to continue the discussion. We have a Christian and an atheist just talking out things, figuring out what has happened, how do we go in different directions, and it's been a great time. William, welcome back to the Unraveler. So glad to have you, man. Thank you for taking the time to spend talking with an atheist. I think this is really commendable of you, and I very much appreciate it. So thanks for being here, man. Oh, I think your audio's still off, buddy. Hang
So
on. Oh, there you go. All right, cool.
there we go. Okay. Yeah, glad to be here again. And it's been a lot of fun. I've got a lot of good feedback from people that have watched, comments. People are interested in what we're talking about. So this has been a real cool experience. I hope everybody that's listening along, I hope you're thinking and we're hoping just at the end of the day, if we're thinking at the end of these podcasts and we're communicating, I think we've done something good and served our community. So, yeah, just great to be here on this rainy Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, well, at least where you are. Here it's been pretty nice, just a little windy. So we're experiencing some different weather, but I'm so glad you're here. I am very excited about this. This has been such a blast so far. So, William, we're gonna just jump right into it. Last week we had a great conversation, starting with chapter one of your book,
Yeah.
and discussing that whether or not atheism versus atheists have a worldview. And I think we established, at least from my recollection, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, and if we still need to revisit it, feel free to correct me. But I think what we established was atheism as a system isn't a belief system or religion. It's simply a rejection of something that claims to have a position on God or some defense for God or evidence for God. Atheists, on the other hand, sure, we have worldviews. Obviously, every one of us are going to believe certain things, but my worldview versus my brother's atheist worldview or some other person's atheist worldview, we're going to be all over the place, and that's totally cool. And so I think if I recall, we came to a conclusion that what you intended with that chapter was to show that yes, even atheists have a worldview. Of course we do. But atheism in general is simply a negation of theism. Theism says God exists. We believe God exists. Atheism says, well, we see no evidence for it, so we don't accept that claim. And that's as far as atheism as a system goes, because it's not really a system beyond that. It's all we have to agree on. But once you talk about us as individuals, oh my goodness, we have a plethora of worldviews. And I'm one of them. And so I might be a humanist, I might be a scientist, I might be an evolutionist, I might be all kinds of different things. But atheism isn't a worldview. It's simply a rejection of a worldview, so to speak, because we don't find enough evidence. So I think that's where we landed as far as chapter one is concerned. Are we on the same page with that, or do you need to clarify?
Well, I mean, I think it is. I think your point is valid that atheism isn't very systematic, but I would also have to say, for Protestantism could also be not very systematic. It holds some common principles, but it's a big house with a lot of people in that house, and so I do think that I do think atheism does juxtapose itself to theism, and because of that, it does have some. I mean, we can call it something. You can't call something a name that doesn't have some sort of um, structure or validity to it. But I don't think generally there are some concrete principles that people have to adopt or confess to become atheists. I think you're right in the point that they could just simply say, don't believe the claims of theism, and that kind of makes you atheist if you're, uh, if you're rejecting those claims. So I think generally, yeah, I think we're sort of on the same page there. Yeah,
Okay, cool. So an atheist doesn't come out of the blue and just say, "Hey, everybody, I've never heard of a God before, but I'm going to say God doesn't exist." That would be weird.
right.
The only reason atheism exists is because somebody came along the line at some point and said, "Hey, I believe a God exists," and somebody else said, "Prove it," and they can't. So we're like, "Well, I'm atheist." So atheism only exists because theism it doesn't, because theism does. Like that's otherwise there would be no sense for it. There'd be
Right,
no
right.
logical reason for atheism to exist. So from that perspective, it isn't a system. It's simply saying it's almost like I'm sitting here saying, okay, show me, and that's it. And oh, you can't. Well, sorry, I'm not inclined to agree with you. Then that's essentially all I can do with atheism. But as an atheist, 100%. I agree with you. I've got worldviews. And that's completely understandable. Who can't? You're going to develop worldviews. And one
Mhm.
of those worldviews might be as simple as, I don't know, which is kind of my worldview at this point. I mean, and I'm content with that. I mean, there's some things that I will tell you, yeah, I think this, I think that. This seems to be the most logical conclusion. And I'm here and I'm here and I'm there and I'm there. And I think these are. But one thing I haven't been able to get to a point yet, now that I'm an atheist and not a theist, is I can no longer say, I know that I know that I know that I know that what I'm telling you, William, is correct. I don't know that. I don't have enough evidence that is substantial enough to say with 100% certainty that I know how we all began. Whereas what I see from theists in any camp of any theological world, of any religion, I know that I know that I know that I'm just like, really? So if you know so certainly, I want to know how you know. And if you're so definitively sure, then please show me this definitive evidence so I also can believe like you do. Until then, I'm in a position where all I can say is, I don't know.
Mhm.
Here's what makes more sense to me because I see evidence for this and I live in a scientific realm, so to speak, because it can actually give me a evidential sphere that both you as a theist and me as an atheist can agree to. But outside of that, I have yet to find a a system that can demonstrate this spiritual realm to me. Which brings us to chapter 2 of your book, the science and atheism concept. So I'm going to give you a chance now to go ahead and give us a summary of chapter 2. Take as long as you need to make your point, and then let's talk about it.
Sure, sure. So again, for maybe if someone's just kind of tuning in for the first time, I wrote this book entitled "The 10 Myths of Atheism" in about 2014. And during this time, I had spent a good bit of time dialoguing, interacting with, exploring, well, quite frankly, a lot of different worldviews and a lot of different approaches to metaphysics, etc. And atheism being, in my opinion, was like sort of the zero sum, sort of a rejection of anything that's not um, materialistic, materialistically measurable or definable. And so, what I found as I kept having these conversations was these certain kinds of um, answers or certain kinds of arguments were being put forth a lot. So, and like we talked about last week, it doesn't necessarily mean that if you're an atheist and you're watching this, or if you read the book and you think, well, I don't believe that's a good argument. Well, good. That's the point. It's not. And I said this last week. Is the point is not to necessarily prove that God exists. It's not necessarily to prove that the Christian faith is the correct faith. It's more or less to say these particular sorts of arguments in the context of the discussion that we're having, they're not good arguments. And so I feel like at the very least, if we can kind of get these arguments off the table, that we can have a real conversation about what the real sort of arguments are. And I think last week we talked a lot about meaning and reasoning and rationality and where they come from. And I think that was good. I think once we sort of got that first sort of thing out of the way, we could discuss something more important and something with more value. And that's what I'm hoping will happen here is we dismiss these bad arguments. It gives us a chance to really talk about what we really have issue with, because we're not idiots. I mean, you're not an idiot. Maybe I'm not. I don't think I am. Some people might think I am. I'm not sure, but
Hey, some
um,
people think I am too, bro. You're not.
right. So but I think we're reasonably intelligent people, and I think that if given the opportunity, we can really hash these things out in a productive way. So anyway, getting to this. So the second myth that I sort of deal with, or bad argument, if you want to kind of frame it like that, is that the atheism is vindicated by science. And so the general idea there is that there's sort of this juxtaposition between religion and science. Science is one thing and religion is another. And then if you're a religious person, then you have to sort of reject science, or if you believe science and um, science somehow contradicts religious ideas. And so what we kind of talk about in this chapter is that really religion and science are measuring or asking two different sorts of questions. And we talk about a bit about what science is. And, the term science itself comes from the Latin scientia, which basically means knowledge. It's the gathering of knowledge, and it's measuring things essentially. Uh, uh, Science in its basic sort of um, essence, if you would, is really measuring things. How much does things weigh? How fast can things go? How tall are things? If I do this to this material thing, this thing reacts. And that's what science does. And religion, on the other hand, asks a different sort of question. It doesn't ask what are the measurements of this thing. It asks what is the meaning of this thing? What is the purpose of it? And I think if you start overlapping those two questions, then you start confusing what both of those things are trying to do. Now, I think I've heard people argue things like, if you believe in science and you can't believe in religion, or science has made this statement. In reality, what happens is people take science, empiricism, and they make a philosophy out of it. And as I talk about in the book, I say things like this, and I think this is to me is a really valid point. It's like if I were to take a beautiful painting or something that you think is a wonderful work, or a piece of music maybe, and I would say, how do you scientifically prove that that's beautiful? Or how do you prove that's a great song? Or how do you prove this is, something we should preserve or keep, or that has value? And you couldn't do that based on any sort of empirical data. You can't say the Mona Lisa is beautiful because it has so many color points on it, or it reflects right light. There's something about it that's intuitive. There's something about it that it's how it strikes the human consciousness. And I guess so. The point being is even though I think, and I would hope most people would say, yes, we recognize that there are intrinsic values in things. Things have sort of a beauty to them, an essence to them. And I'm using something like art because it's very sort of benign. I mean, and it's something that doesn't, outside of it just being aesthetically beautiful to us, it doesn't really have any value besides that. I think you can kind of see where empirical science doesn't have the capacity to tell us that a painting is beautiful or not, or why. And so I think to say, and we could extrapolate that, we could say, okay, and I want to be careful here when I bring this argument in, because I think very too often moral arguments are brought as though, if in other words, if I say, well, you're an atheist, well, that means you have to be abjectly anti-moral. I don't think that's true. Or if I'm a Christian, that means I'm the most moral person ever. I don't think that's true. I think when I talk about the value of morality, in other words, why is it wrong for me to steal your stuff from you? Why is it wrong for me to, kill somebody? I don't think that we disagree that it's wrong. Okay, I'm not saying, and I don't think that means without those reasons that we just go out and start murdering and killing people. I don't think that's what I'm saying either. But what I'm saying is we believe and we intuit that there's a value to actions and the way we interact with the world. And those things can't be proven through scientific empirical methods and data. And so and so that's what this chapter is sort of about, is that science is sort of a thing and religion is sort of a thing. And those two things don't necessarily ask the same thing. They don't really measure the same thing. They can integrate well enough. They don't have to be contradictory. And I think the other part of that is that, and I think I may discuss this a little bit more in depth as we go into the book, but is the idea that religion is antithetical to science. And, you go back to, you always hear the stories about Galileo and his interactions with the Catholic Church and things like that. But I think that's sort of missing the historical context of science, because really a lot of times religion and science integrated in the ancient past. In other words, knowledge was passed along. Physical knowledge about how we interact with the physical world was also passed along with this sort of religious mythology as well. So it was really more intertwined in the ancient past than it was today. So this dichotomy of science versus religion, that's kind of what I'm dealing with there. And so that's maybe an introductory to the thought processes that maybe lead us into this chapter.
Okay, I appreciate that summary. So I think okay, so boy, I have a lot of thoughts. A lot of thoughts on that. Okay, number one, the opening concept that you stated, and it's the chapter of the title of the chapter, that atheism is vindicated by science, or science vindicates atheism. I don't agree with that, and I don't know. I don't know if any particular atheists would. I can't argue for all atheists. As I said, we all have worldviews, but atheism as a system, I don't think would make the case that science vindicates it. Um, I do not think science is the only possible method by which we can determine things. I think it's the only possible method by which we can determine things currently, because it's the only one we have that we've discovered that we can all agree can determine things. So that's where I'm at. My issue with theism and theists in general, especially apologists who try to argue for their gods, is they've yet to provide a system by which all of us can evaluate systematically and come to the same conclusion. Oh, yes, God exists. For example, one of them would be if your God would just come down here and say, hey, guys, that would work. That would be pretty amazing. But for some reason, he remains invisible. Fine. Faith. Faith would be a great one. I would love it if faith would be your system. But oddly enough, you all have seemed to come to conclude that faith isn't sufficient, which is why you have apologetics and try to use empirical arguments to prove the existence of God, which I'm scratching my head saying, okay, so you're actually, you guys are the ones coming at us using empirical arguments, scientific arguments, and then you're turning around saying we can't use scientific arguments to prove the existence of God. And so atheism is, negated because you can't use science. And I'm like, but you're the one using science. So that's another thing that frustrates me. I'm like, okay, if you're going to use science, then don't attack us for saying it wasn't adequate. So that's a huge problem for me. So what I'm asking is not to say, hey, William, prove scientifically and empirically God exists. I'm cool if you have another system. I just need one that can be tested and verified in some way, even if you tell me what those parameters are, some way that both you and I can come to the same conclusion. I hear Christians tell me all the time, oh, well, I had an experience and you should just believe God because experientially I can prove you. Well, that's great for you. You had an experience. You're asking me to trust you, not God. You want me to trust your experience, and that's fine, but I'm sorry, that doesn't do anything for me. So I need something more than that. So if you're going to tell me that experience is going to be our system, then you've got to give me some measure by which I can have your same experience and then test it to prove that your experience was the same as my experience, and therefore you and I have the same outcome. So far, nothing. So that is why I say science seems to be the only standard by which we can prove anything, because at least both theists and atheists can agree we can prove things through science. I can't find any measure by which I can prove God. I've yet to see it. So what I'm hearing is, well, you just have to believe God exists. Why? By faith. Okay, faith. How does faith work then? Explain this system to me. Explain how faith proves the existence of God. Because Joseph Smith had an experience of faith, and so has Jim Jones, and so had all their followers, and so has thousands of others. They all have experiences of faith. So if what we're coming down to is it's just faith, which religion is true then at that point? You open the door to anybody to be right. And I know what Christians, well, yeah, but I know I'm right because Yahweh's real. I mean, okay, that's good for you because, but again, that's your experience. That's reformed epistemology. That's wonderful. Great argument for you, but it doesn't help me. And it doesn't help Joseph Smith or the thousands of followers of Mormonism or Jehovah's Witnesses or Muslims. Like, I need to know a system by which all of us can test and come to the same conclusion. I don't care what it is. If it's not science, give me one. So that's my first thing. So before I go on to my others, I would love to hear your response on that. Anything. Give me something.
Well, I think I'm going to go back to, a work of art. And I don't know if that will be satisfying, but the reality is we do as commonly experience, like the painting like the Mona Lisa or, Van Gogh's Starry Night. These are not just one or two people like these paintings, multitudes of people, maybe millions, maybe touching billions of people. I mean, there's 7 billion people, so possibly billions of people look at this same thing and they're moved and they say, this is a beautiful, valuable work of art. Now, if you were to ask me the same question, you were to say, well, William, tell me what system would you use to make that assessment? I would be hard pressed to tell you I have a system. And so what that makes me think is that some things are uh, affect us and are intuitively gathered that may, at least at this point in time, I don't know of a system that I could use to vindicate the experience of art or the experience of music, or maybe even the experience of friendship or love or even the opposite feelings, hatred, things. Um, ideas like justice. I don't know of a system. We can, and I think we try to quantify them in language. We try to give them shape and structure so we can discuss them and talk about them. But I think there's a difference between the sort of knowledge that science produces and that kind of knowledge. And I guess my response to that is, again, I think when you're asking for a system, you're wanting me to tell you something like a scientific formula that comes to a conclusion that God exists. And I don't think that's the correct approach. I was actually talking to a friend today, and he may be watching. And if you are, Clayton, hello. But we were talking about these sorts of things, and I made this statement. I said, if we could prove, this is going to be one of those paradoxes. If you could prove scientifically God existed, then what you would have proven would not be God, because God would have to be beyond those definitions, right? So if you could define it, it ceases to be the thing you're trying to define. So I don't, if God does exist, let's just say, put a big question mark. If God does exist, I don't think that sort of God, the kind of God we describe in classical theism, would ever be subject to a system. Now, I know that sounds satisfactory because you're saying I'm a rational person and you're asking me to accept this thing, perhaps, and you're not giving me a reason that I should. Um, and I think that's where we start going into these arguments of, okay, well, what about this? What about that? Um, I'll stop right there because I think I could go further talking about what I think is going on there. But I think my answer there is we're still talking about two different ways of arriving at knowledge. And let me ask you this question, and you can respond to this. Do you see what I'm saying? That there's another sort of knowledge that's not physical. It's sort of a value that something has. It's hard to measure, but it's real, like a painting or music. Something we both, I think, can agree that have value, but that's hard to define. What do you think about that? What is your opinion about that?
So when it comes to the nature of value and beauty and what people think of it, um, I'm not sure that we can at least yet know why certain brains are attracted to some things and not others. But I can tell you that scientifically, we can look at the brain and see when certain things trigger those brains and when certain things don't. So I do think we can explain things like the Mona Lisa, and we can say, hey, look, certain colors in this brain get boom, 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 and certain brains and certain colors in that brain get certain, boom, boom, boom. So you can actually evaluate those things. And the reason that matters is because you and I can both go to the Mona Lisa and we can visibly see it, we can physically touch it, empirically prove that it exists, right? So there's both as a theist and an atheist, we can 100% verify that the Mona Lisa exists. So that's not even in the same ballpark as God, because at least we're saying this thing absolutely exists. And all we're trying to determine is why do some brains get attracted to this and others not? That's not the same thing as saying some brains get drawn to this non-existent being that we don't know exists or doesn't exist or it never been proven or we can't see, we can't touch, nobody can verify. Like that's entirely different. Like that's not the same thing as saying first we've empirically proven that something exists, and then we're trying to determine why some people are attracted to it and others don't or aren't. Um, but when it comes to God, we still need to first prove that he exists. Like, and that's a totally different world. Like to say that some people are drawn to it and some people aren't, that's all fine and good, but that could be just as easily explained as saying some people are insane and some people aren't. So that's not helpful really, to draw the distinction of beauty and attraction, because that doesn't do anything for me because
Well, I'm not necessarily talking about just in what you're talking about as far as how the brain reacts to stimulus. I mean, and that's my field of study is psychology, but I'm not talking about how the brain reacts because on my desk in front of me, I have a coffee cup that tries to tell some kind of joke about Sigmund Freud. It's kind of humorous. I have ink pens. I have paper. My brain is going to react to every single one of those stimulus in their colors here. It's possible that before me on this desk are all the colors. There's even a picture of a person. So all the elements that are present in the painting of the Mona Lisa are right in front of me, but I would not say that before me is this priceless scene. And if I were to say to you, someone broke into whatever, and I don't know where it's kept at, by the way. I'm not that intelligent tonight. But if somebody broke into wherever they keep the Mona Lisa and took a Sharpie marker and drew a mustache on her, I think we would both be like, oh my God, that's a crime. You've destroyed something of value. Not because the stimulus is affecting the brain, but we perceive that there is a value. Now we could talk about why there's a value. There's obviously a historical context there. There's the meaning that this thing has become. It's not just it's an image that's shared by so many people, so the value comes from different places. I get that. It's not just the picture, but there's something there that's not just stimulus. It's not just colors. It's not just the brain reacting to things. We perceive that there's a value there, but it's when we start saying, why is there a value? And I picked art because I think if I were to start saying things like, well, why would a baby or your best friend or somebody you love, why do they have value? I think we could say, well, they have sociological value. They, maybe tribally people, bonding together helped us to survive. And I'm sure that is the absolute case. But when you get to art, it's almost like there's a value there that we perceive, that we all agree that is there. And it's not, like I said, it's not just a random, I like this, you don't like that. It's consistent. People see these same things and they have these same experiences, and there's a value there. So it's not just stimulus response. It's a perceived, intuitive sort of reality. And I think for me, when we talk about what do we need to prove God exists or not, for me, it's really not so much, from my experience, proving that God exists so that I can believe in God. It's if I believe in this thing and it affects me this way and I'm reacting to it, then I want to be sure that what I'm reacting to and engaging with is not irrational. So for me, it's not, let me prove to you God exists. It's, I believe that God exists. So why do I believe that? And am I being irrational? And can I put forth real rationality for what I what I intuitively believe to be true. So I think I would probably, it may be disappointing, but I don't really know that I have the ability, or anybody really has the ability to talk you into believing in God or probably anything else, to be honest with you. You have to sort of know something about that yourself. You have to arrive at that conclusion yourself. But what I think I can do is give a rationality for what I do believe and what I do experience, and one that doesn't contradict what we know to be reality. Okay. And I think that's important. So, and I don't want to ramble on too long with that, but I do want to come. So one of the things I do say in this chapter is there are claims that religions make that do overlap scientific claims. And I think if there is a point where Christians particularly have a weakness there, is that when we try to argue our beliefs in the faces of certain sorts of realities, scientific realities, I think that's a mistake. So I kind of shotgunned and vomited there a lot of information. So I'll let you respond as best as you can to my rambling there. So
No, it's okay. I love. I mean, I enjoy listening to you for what it's worth. I appreciate your constant honestness. That's awesome to me. Your honesty. That's huge because not many Christians will admit, well, we can't prove the existence of God. We just have to, accept it because we personally believe it. Like, I don't know if that's what I heard you say, and if that's what you said, that's honest, and I appreciate that. I get tiresome of Christians that, or especially apologists that walk around and say, "Oh, I can prove the existence of God." No, you can't. You literally can't. and and I'm like, why are you trying? Like, you cannot do it. It really comes down to your personal faith. I mean, would you agree with that?
yeah, and personal faith. I prefer in these kind of conversations to use the word intuition, because I think that's a more of a clinical type of term for it, and it gives us the room to kind of talk about that from different people's experience. Because I'm a Christian, right, and I believe the word, but there are Buddhists who don't believe in a God particularly at all, but they have this intuition about the nature of things. Are so I like the word intuition because it leaves a lot of room for various experiences. But yeah, I
Sure.
would agree generally. Yes, I think that I believe this because this is the way I believe. I don't know. I don't. Nothing's ever proved it to me, and I never have had this experience where I was like, "Whoa, dang it! Now I've got to believe in God because somebody made this great argument." That's never happened for me. Period. I mean,
Well, personally, I don't think it's ever happened for anybody. That's my
yeah,
opinion.
yeah. I probably not. Really, probably
I don't
not.
think anybody who says it did, I don't believe it.
Right. It is a common human experience, right? And I was watching documentaries about Neanderthals that have lived that were maybe pre-human, if it depends on how you look at things like that. But there seemed to be religious type of ceremonies, and they were burying their dead. So this whole intuitive way of seeing the world, like art, is something that we share. Now, if someone came from of a species came from another planet and they landed on Earth and they went to our museums, and they may look on the walls and say, "Why the heck are you guys keeping these pieces of cloth with all this paint on it? It looks like all of you guys. What's the Well, this is the Mona Lisa." Well, what, right? So we all assume this, like this is just a reality. But if somebody were looking from the outside, they may see it as absurd, right? They could see what we show value for it to be absurd. And I think that's sort of what I see about when we're discussing about God and religion, is that there's a value placed there. Maybe is it absolutely real or not? Um, would we one day be able to create the God meter, like Star Trek, and you could, and we proved it. I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think ever that's the case.
Well, I mean, we could if God would just come down here and be like, "Hey guys," I mean, I'm just saying, like, what is the deal here? Why is he making it so complicated?
Mhm. Well, I've thought about that too. Now follow me here on this sort of thought experiment, because I've asked myself the question: what could physically happen in the universe then I would absolutely look at that thing and say, this thing happening right here is absolutely proof that God existed. Now follow me here. Like, so if I were, and I think I've used this before. So this is my uh Sigmund Freud cup, just backwards. You can't read it, but it says ego and super ego walk into a bar. The bartender says, I'm going to need to see some ID. It's a psychological. That's stupid. Anyway, so I
Yeah.
said if I came in this room and this cup was floating above my desk, okay, and I've asked myself, would I look at that and say that's proof that God exists? No, I'd say it may be proof that I'm hallucinating. Um, it could be proof that some sort of gravitational anomaly is taking place in this room. And I think if I saw that one time and never saw it again, I don't think I would say that this weird phenomena constituted evidence that God existed. It's hard for me to think of what it would be. You know, you say, well, if God came down from out of heaven, you know, maybe this glowing thing comes out of the sky. I don't know, but how would that prove that the God I'm talking about exists? Because I'm talking about something that's the source and ground of meaning and being and existence, not just a phenomena like a weird thing that happens within the universe. Because quite frankly, weird things happen all the time in the universe, right? So I don't know. I think that sort of thought process is probably, I get it because I think those things myself as well. Like, what would it be that would have to happen that I would know? You said that I would know that I know that I don't know. I don't know that there's ever a thing like that.
All right. So, William Vincent, are you saying that you don't know that you know that you know that God exists?
Not in an empirical way. No, I don't.
In
Uh,
what?
Intuitively, in the same
Okay.
way that I know.
All right. So intuitively.
Yes.
All right. So intuitively. Um. So under the right circumstances, because of intuition, God can reveal Himself to certain people and not others, but only those who have intuition.
I think all of us have that
So why?
intuition.
So I mean, would you say that I'm a person who lacks intuition?
No, I don't think so. No.
Okay, so why don't I see God then?
I think what you're rejecting, and this is my opinion, I don't want to speak for you, but I think most of what you're rejecting is something I'm rejecting as well. I think some of the things that we have agreed upon that we do think exist that sort of have this are sort of maybe, and like I said, I don't want to speak for you, but this is the impression I get. Sometimes I think we're describing sort of the same thing, but we're trying to do it in different ways because both of us realize that we are a phenomena. I mean, we are two pieces of hamburger meat sitting here on the internet having this thoughtful discussion in this planet that's zooping around this star that's it's a phenomena. It's a weird phenomena. And it's
I
not,
mean, okay, but like so you have intuition, I have intuition. Your intuition says Yahweh exists. My intuition says flying spaghetti monster exists. Like, what makes your intuition better than mine?
well, I think for me, I think that second part of that was Yahweh and Flying Spaghetti Monster are two ways of trying to quantify this intuition that I have that that there's something beyond random chance and material.
Okay, so you're not in any way, shape, or form arguing Yahweh is the only being that beyond all this. It has to be Yahweh. That's not your argument.
Where we're at right now in this thought process, no, I think, and to me, it's like, you can't go, if I'm going to leave here and go to the local grocery store, I can't just walk out of the door of this office and be in the grocery store. There's a progression of thoughts. So I think, no, I think from where we're at discussing right now, and we're talking about how do we understand knowledge and how do we measure things. No, I don't think you jump from this to Yahweh exists or flying spaghetti monster or Taoism or Buddhism or Hinduism or all the other sorts of ways that we just it's sort of this idea that human existence seems to be such a phenomena in this universe that doesn't really make sense. It's too much. It's too much of an experience in a material universe. I mean, I look at planets and stars and I see chemicals interacting, I see energy, but we are the only thing that I'm sure that I know of that is even aware that anything's happening. And if we didn't exist, it seems to me that and I'm just thinking from this bare minimal sort of thought process. If we didn't exist, who knows that anything would even know the universe existed at all? So just that is a phenomena. And so that compels me to say, what the hell is going on? Why are we, what's happening here? And how do I relate to this thing? And what do I do with this gift of life? And so I don't think it's contrived. You know, it's not just and I'm bored today. I think I'll come up with a God. It's like, no, I'm experiencing this phenomena of life.
Okay,
And
but you've chosen the Bible for some reason. Like, what are the reasons you randomly said, did you flip a coin? Was it a Ouija board? Like, what made you say, oh, the Bible's God, and I'm going to choose the Bible? That sounds good. I mean, you're arguing as I am, saying, I don't know, there's no proof of any of it. We don't know. But in your mind, there has to be some intelligent mind behind it. Fine. I can disagree with that. And we can go down that road, which we will, I'm sure. We don't have time in every episode to cover everything. So we're eventually going to go down that road. But let's just say, for the sake of argument right now, great. Intelligent design, it has to be. What by what standard did you randomly choose the Bible and Yahweh? Do you think it had anything to do with the culture you were raised in, or do you think that you literally said, "Oh, this is absolutely the only right one"?
yeah, no, I think there are probably a good number of people in the world that have probably came to conclusions just based on that. I think they maybe have had this, initial inertia. I mean, this initial movement, maybe the mysticism or mystical view of things, or seeing, and then the closest thing for them to grab a hold of was, well, this is what my family believes, this is what my grandparents believe, and they grab a hold of it, and that becomes their identity. And I think that's probably a lot of people. Now, for me personally, I didn't choose that route because I felt like that was contrived. I didn't want to just jump to a conclusion. So there is a whole thought process for me as to why I have chosen to engage through the things I engaged in and believe in things the way I believe in them. I think the first thing I look at, and this may be a bit different than some people, is I don't look at religions in competing sort of ways. I looked at them more as a phenomenon that continually repeated itself. So, and I see this, religions do tend to take certain forms and have certain patterns and have certain elements, and they seem to be repetitive, and they do seem, and I can say this from a scientific perspective, they are psychologically driven. They do engage human psyche, color, smell, repetition, um, um, I'm thinking not culture, but you see the repetitious act. There's a word that's escaping me right now, but these things they're how we integrate with the world around us as human beings, and we're moved by these things. Okay, so it doesn't matter if you're Jews, Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, Native Americans, with their shamanism. Fire was a part of that. Food culture was a part of that. The ways of sanctifying the rhythms of the world that was a part of it. And so I look for these patterns, and that was kind of the first thing I went to. Is to me it seems like, as a human being living in this world, there is just certain ways that when we interact with the world around us through these sort of vehicles, it does something to us psychologically. And I would argue, and I think I do a little bit later, I do think that those religions generally have a humanizing effect, and they generally have had a positive effect. Now, yes, you immediately can say, well, there have been some terrible things happen in the name of religion. Yes, absolutely, 100% terrible, terrible things have happened. But generally, over the broad course of human history, if you look at how people have been affected by these religious concepts, we have got more humanistic. We have got, there was a time in the world where owning people as slaves was just, nobody thought anything about it. I mean, it just wasn't, nobody thought, well, you shouldn't own this person. But today, there's slavery is almost eradicated, and that's been within the last few thousand years. And it was a common phenomena. And I'm not saying that to try to quick punch, Christianity changed that. I don't even think that's absolutely the case. I think that there's something about us interacting with each other and us interacting with the cosmos and holding to these intrinsic values and saying these things are beautiful, good, and true. It causes us to be better generally in the long run. And I think that's the function of religion. And I hope I'm not being confusing there because I'm not trying to be. Um,
Well, I
but
mean,
but yeah,
it sounds to me like we're back to what we talked about in the first episode, and then even in our private conversation, that you're willing to concede that religion can exist without a God, and just in the state of morality, if we use that as the sphere to discuss morality, because I'm like, and I concede to that. I'm okay with that. If we're willing to say religion is a sphere by which we discuss morality. I mean, okay, if we need that sphere called religion, all right. I mean, fine, we can do that. I don't think it's necessary because I mean, number one, I think religion has already had such a bad taste in most of our mouths. I just want to get rid of it. But fine, if that's necessary, and you're saying we must have religion to discuss morality because philosophy is not enough to do it, okay, I mean, I'm willing to have that discussion, but to say that the only way that we can see beauty and morality and have these desires and to be able to say that none of this stuff can happen without some other alternative but God and in particular Yahweh, I'm just like I just don't see it. I think it's a stretch. I think it's a completely illogical leap to go from look at all this wonder we have in this world and say, and because of that, it must be an intelligent designer. And I'm like, I mean, I could just as well come back to you and be like, yeah, look at all the shit going on in this world. Look how much this intelligent designer screwed up. Look at the bad DNA that we have, and look at how much like I have freaking like eye problems all the time with my eyes, and I have lip problems, and like we have issues all the time. There's people born handicapped for crying out loud, and it's like you're telling me that's an intelligent designer. He was so intelligent that he had to design it that way. And I get it. I know the whole sin caused it all. But now we're back to a whole nother issue. Then now you have to prove sin exists. I mean, so I mean, you like my thought is that the Christian worldview has so many insurmountable things that they have to prove exists. It's mind blowing to me, especially without any foundational system by which you can verify any of them. You just make claims, and I was there. So when I say you, I mean I did too, bro, because I was 100% a Christian, and I would have tried the same way you're going, except I mean probably less honest than you. I would have tried to be more dogmatic that Yahweh has to be the only way. Um, but I mean, I guess I just got to a point where I'm like, wow, what is going on here? There's no evidence that Yahweh exists. There's no evidence that sin's a thing. Um, and so they play off each other. And so we're just constantly running in these circles thinking these got to be the case. And I'm like, we're caught in a matrix that doesn't, that can't be verified by any sort of evidence whatsoever. Um, I leave science out of it. Fine. You don't want to use science to prove it. Again, I just want to know what can. And you're saying nothing can. And I'm like, okay, so what does someone like
well, I'll,
me?
I'll say I'll
Hang
say
on,
this.
hang on. Let me
Go
finish my
ahead. Sorry. Go ahead. Yep.
someone like me, like I have people constantly in my life, like family and other friends. Oh, you just need to turn back to Jesus. You just need to repent. And I'm like, okay, so what are you asking me to do? You're asking me to magically believe again in something that I don't think exists because I can't verify it. So if you're going to tell me to do that, you got to give me something more than just do it or else. Like that, I'm sorry, the threats aren't working for me anymore.
Yeah, no, and it's regrettable that people take those routes, because I don't think I really don't think you've chosen this path just to be antagonistic, or I think this is something you really have thought about. I would say it's not easy, to say I was a Christian and now I'm not. That takes a bit of courage to make those. So it's regrettable that people would try to bully and threaten. If you just need to repent. Well, oh crap. Well, I did. Thank you. That solved all the problems in my world. So that's not a. But and so I think you know, and probably the next chapter really digs into this idea is that you can't prove that God exists empirically based on the scientific method. But what I will introduce probably, I think, in the next chapter is that you can provide evidence that's consistent with a hypothesis or thought. So I wouldn't say that I can prove to you absolutely slam dunk. Here's a picture of God. Here's being God with a selfie. Here we are. You know,
That
boom.
that would do it though. That would
Take
do
that,
it.
take that atheist.
But
Here we are,
just
right?
saying that would do it.
Yeah, it would kill every. I don't think that's ever going to happen. But I can say, if this is true, then these things should be consistent. The evidence, and I use the idea of of our legal system, right? Because if you're going to court to prove somebody killed somebody or stole something, it's very rare that you're going to have a video of this person doing this act, or it's going to be absolutely impossible for everybody to be there and see them because but what they do is they say this is evidence that is consistent with our theory. We're going to say this guy did that, and what's consistent with that? Well, he was in the area at the same time. There was nobody else there. He had motive. He had opportunity. And so, do we have that slam dunk? This is absolutely no. But if the evidence is consistent enough with a hypothesis, at some point it becomes irrational to deny the hypothesis, even though I can't absolutely prove empirically that it happened. It's deductive. And so I don't.
I mean, hang on, because I got to disagree, because I will tell you, every religion will tell you that they can do the same thing that you're arguing for. So
Sure,
what makes your God any different?
not as different as that statement might imply. I don't necessarily. Okay, let me rewind just a bit. So, if you take religion to be a human phenomenon, okay, and it has to be because out of 7 billion of us, if it were just like one tribe in Brazil that was saying, "Hey, we believe in the Oogie Boogie," I don't know, and the rest of the 7 billion of us said, "Well, that's stupid. We're all atheists." Then I'd say there's probably something in the water in that part of Brazil that makes those people insane, right? But 7 billion of us, and as far back as we can see in history, we have just had these sorts of religious inclinations, these intuitions, these ways of seeing things to the point it's a human phenomenon. So you don't start with which religion is best or which religion is right. You start with religion is a human phenomenon. It exists. So in that sphere of people are tend to be religious. And I remember reading an article by an atheist guy, and he was talking about that his father had passed away, and he went into the house, and he said the wind blew through, and he said, I don't believe in God, and I don't believe in any of that stuff. He said, but I can't deny in that moment I had this overwhelming sensation that my father's presence or something was there. And he said, I don't believe it happened, but I did experience it. And so I thought that was very honest of him. And what I'm saying there is there's these ways we experience things. Are they absolutely true or not? that may be a matter of debate, but we do have these experiences. And because of that, that leads to the question, out of all the ways that we're engaging with this, are there ways that are better and are there ways that are worse? That's when we start talking. So I don't necessarily think Islam is 100% wrong, or Buddhism is 100% wrong, and Hinduism is 100% wrong, and whatever religion I can think of, and Christianity is
When
100% right. I think that
when you say 100% wrong, do you mean about every belief, or do you mean about the particular God they believe in? Because you can't say they're not 100% wrong if you think you're 100% right about your God.
right, but I don't necessarily think we're talking about a different thing. And I've studied this enough to know that this is not just a cursory. This is studying it in depth and understanding. So when you talk about Hinduism, for instance, Hinduism talks about the Brahma. They talk about the avatars of Brahma. But if you really study it, they're still describing sort of this essence that gives meaning and life to things in these particular instances of this essence kind of being incorporated. When you talk about Buddhism, Buddhism tends to avoid defining what that essence would be, but it does talk about nirvana and create and having this space in the mind where and then the Buddha becomes sort of this incarnation of this principle. And then some forms of Buddhism believe that there are many bodhisattvas or Buddhas that emerge in the world to teach people the way. So you're seeing sort of these patterns emerge, and that's what I looked at to begin with, is this idea of this overarching. And what I'm giving to you and what I've been saying is sort of my thought process is there. This is how I kind of work through this thing. Is this ultimate source of meaning, this ultimate source of structure, and then particular instances of these truths sort of being embodied in people and teachers, and then how do we practice this in our daily life in a way that's meaningful? And that's where religion comes in. Religion is not, it shouldn't be. And I know there are some religious views, and particularly in America, and I don't want to pick on my Protestant friends, but a lot of times their view does start with religion first. It does start with the Bible says, and my mama said, and Pastor Jim said, and that's irrelevant, what they said, essentially. My thought's not coming from that direction. It's not this first, and let's make the world make sense to this. This is what's happening in the world, and how do I make sense of what I see happening? I think I'm trying to come at it from a different direction.
So, I mean, okay, so I find it odd that you and I are landing in different places then, because I would absolutely agree with that last statement, which is why I'm now an atheist, because I'm looking at science and saying, oh, number one, I see no evidence for the existence of God, but I see a shit ton of evidence for all of these other possibilities that actually do make sense of why we're here. And I'm like, why would I continue to believe in something, even based on your argument that for millions of years, however long, all these people believe in religion? What could it be that science has developed now and it wasn't developed then? I mean, like, it just makes sense to me. But I mean, I guess my question to you, do you have kids, right?
Yes.
So have you ever taught your kids, if 10 of your friends jump off a bridge, you're going to jump off with them? Something along those lines?
Yeah, no, and absolutely not. Do the opposite. Don't be stupid.
Right.
Right.
But that's what I hear you saying. Well, I've seen all these people do it for so many years. I'm just going to do it too. Bro, you're doing the exact same thing you told your kids not to do. Like
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. So but that's not necessarily, I'm not saying, okay, it's an observation, first of all, and the observation doesn't mean that the phenomena is correct, okay? And you're right. If everybody were, setting themselves on fire and running in circles, that wouldn't compel me to do the same thing. But I could, and what I'm saying is that this sort of religious propensity of human beings is a phenomenon. It's a real thing that's happening. Is it right? Should we do it? I'm not saying that's the case, but I'm saying it is a real phenomenon. It is really something that seems to be deeply ingrained in what we are as creatures. Matter of fact, some people from the evolutionary biological side of things believe that that religion and pre sort of human hominids, these sort of things was what sort of caused us to evolve into what we are now. And there's probably good arguments to be made for that, regardless of whether we believe the intuition is correct or not, right? It's just this thing has formed us. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is the idea of is God a reality is one question, and the what what are should there be any religious response to that, or if there should be, what would be a good one? That's a different question. This one doesn't lead to this one, but this one makes you ask the question about this one. That's the way I see that.
So, would you agree that regardless of anything, anybody in your past, including your own father, for history, ultimately has no bearing on whether or not you have faith in God?
No, it absolutely does. Yes. Yeah.
It does. So
I,
you're basing your faith on the fact that other people had faith.
well, no, it has having an influence on me. I'd be hard pressed to say that the way I was raised in that, but you have to understand, I was raised as a
No, I'm
low.
not denying that at all. I
So
like
I was,
that part I agree, which is why I argue in my book that you're as brainwashed as I was. So I mean, you already know I call you that. So I mean, that's the
if
whole
I had
concept.
a, if I had have read, I could easily be a Buddhist today. I have great respect for Buddhism. I think I just feel like there's parts of that are missing. Um, or if I felt like Hinduism was more aligned with reality, then I would have been Hindu. And I mean that because I'd
Dude, it's a
never,
really good point though. Like I'm sorry to interrupt, but like because we're
yeah,
running out of time, so we're at a point now where I'm trying to like get closed out here instead of letting you
sure.
talk a lot. But I'm sorry, we got to get some thoughts cut in here. So I mean, what you just said, I'm like, okay, comports with reality. Um, Science comports with reality much more than the theoretical gods do. I don't understand why you're still inclined to go with a presupposition of God when science actually has substantial possibilities that are based on evidence and things that both you and I agree on.
Because science
I
doesn't answer the questions. That's what we started with. Science is not answering those questions at all.
It doesn't have to answer the questions. The problem isn't does science answer these questions? The problem is since science doesn't answer these questions, therefore God. We already talked about that in the last episode, and you said that if something isn't answering it, it doesn't give us the right to jump to the conclusion of God. And yet,
Sure.
that's what I hear you doing.
No, no, because I have a very good reason, and what I'm saying here is the reason for the question. It's not begging the question.
Okay.
Okay, so we again, if you follow the thought process, we live in a phenomenal world. We're conscious, aware, sentient beings. We have the capacity for these discussions, these ideas. We tend to, by nature, seem to be psychologically hardwired. I mean, there's studies that show there's parts of our brains that react to spiritual phenomena. We're literally brain hardwired for religious experience. So it's
Wait,
not
wait, where are you getting that from? What?
from neuroscience. Yes, there's
Hardwired to experience
yes,
spiritual phenomena?
yeah, they're a part. Yes, they're, and I can link the studies. I've never bluffed. That's the reason I don't play poker. They're absolute research. Now, whether that means it's real or not, that's neither here nor there. But what it does mean is our brains have parts of them that react to spiritual experience. They're physically parts of our
You
brain.
mean react to experiences we can't explain? Because I would agree with that. I don't know that I would.
Well, the studies have studied various religious people in various religious contexts, and when they say I'm having a religious experience, it's the same things happening in the brain, and it's particular regions of the brain that react to those things. So there's
Right.
parts of
So
the
they're saying spiritual experience because that's what these people are calling it. But in essence, what it really is are experiences we can't explain.
well, it doesn't even matter if we can't explain it. It's a part of our brain that is wired to. Okay, so when you look at a color, the color red doesn't exist in the real world. It exists because your brain is giving you a visual experience of the color red to
Right.
represent a certain light. Okay,
Right.
so the same thing is whether or not the spiritual experience itself is real. the brain pattern, the response to it is real. And so
So it's
so
responding to something it can't explain, and it's calling it spiritual, just like your brain's calling it red.
it could be, or it could be, I'm standing and looking over a beautiful mountain and I have this, but these sort of religious phenomena that our brains do respond to them, and it seems that it is wired into our brain to sort of have these experiences. And I guess what I'm saying is, if these things that are true, if our brains tend to have this, then it makes you ask the question: is there something? Is this real? Is it not real? Did I make this up? Is it because my mom and dad taught me, or is it because there's something valuable? Is my religion the only religion? Are there other religions? Are all religions equally valued? These are valid questions
Those
that
are
are not.
all valid questions.
Yes.
And I agree, they're great questions to ask. They are not questions, they are not good questions to conclude at the end of it when you don't have an answer to say, well, I don't have any other way to explain it, so therefore God. And that's what I continuously keep coming back to with you all. It's like it's the same thing over and over again. I can't explain it. It has to be God. No, it doesn't have to be God. It just means you can't explain it yet. Like, why do you jump to God?
It doesn't have to, and hopefully I'm not. That's the reason I'm being very tedious and drawn out with this, is because I'm not trying to jump to a conclusion. I'm trying to work through the thought process, and I'm trying to be as sure as I can on one step before I take the next step. And so the basic, and the takeaway probably at this point from my thought process is, I do believe that things like rationality, knowledge, like all forms of knowledge, all of these things, if you the infinite regress is problematic. At some point, you have to run into the absolute source of where they come from. That's number one. Number two is, I feel like the phenomena of human experience is seemingly by nature almost religious. And because of that, it does cause us to ask the question: should we believe these things or should we not? And that doesn't mean we should jump right to, yeah, we should believe, or these things have validity, so absolutely, we should become, Christians. No, but we should ask those questions. And if they are valid, in what way are they valid?
And dude, I'm with you. You should ask the questions, and I have no problem with asking the questions. But do you think logically you should make any conclusions when you only have questions?
No, that's what
No,
leads us
but yet that's
into.
what Christians are doing. You're not waiting for the conclusion to arrive based on the information. You're saying, "Oh, well, God." And you're just settling. You're settling on an answer when you absolutely don't know that that's the answer.
I have it personally. Now I know that people probably do that. Me personally, no. I haven't just settled on that. And there was plenty of time in my life, probably before the last 8 or 9 years, that if you'd asked me what religion is best, I would have probably told you there's really most of them, and I still think there's value to most of them. But I would have told you very specifically then, I didn't feel like that any of them were more or less valuable than the others. That I particularly chose the Christian religion because it was familiar to me and it gave me something to interact with that I was familiar with. I have since changed that viewpoint because of more information and things I've thought about, but I can still make that statement today, and I think it's fair enough to say that there is value in almost every religion that's practiced. Now, your fringe religions, your Jim Jones kind of cults, they've popped up all over human history as well. But generally, by and large, you take places like Tibet, and I'm trying to think of the other place where Buddhism is more the cultural religion. People interact with these things very culturally. It's a part of the identity of the people. It's a very natural flow of interactions there. It's a very important part of their human existence. And so I think I could at least say that. I could at least say that religions offer something of value, and it's not one is right and all the rest of them are wrong. It's like all of them have a lot of similarities, but they deviate on very important points. And that's
And
the
it just sounds to me like you're making a case that religion should be a system by which we determine morality, and every culture has its own morality, and this is wonderful because some form it this way and some form it that way, but you don't need God for any of that. I don't, I'm not following the need for God in any of your arguments for for
Well,
religion.
it'd be like saying, well, if I throw this pin in the air, it falls by itself. I don't need gravity. I've got the pin does this by itself.
No,
That's
but
not
I'm not arguing that because I believe
right
it.
because it's happening right before us, right?
Because
It's a
gravity is
phenomenon,
real.
right? And it's a phenomenon. You're seeing it happen, right? So it's not like I'm saying, well, I need a God. No, these things are happening, and the phenomena itself, we're quantifying a reality that we're experiencing. We're not making it up. No more gravity is not something that I can point to and say that's gravity. Matter of fact, we really don't know what gravity is. We know how it acts on the physical
No,
world.
I mean, I understand that, but I mean,
Right.
I agree with you. Dealing with phenomenon, religion, or whatever, but like, and that's great. But all that demonstrates is we're dealing with a phenomenon on a human level. Why bring in theism into it? Why does there have to be some supernatural being to to discuss this phenomenon? Like evolution itself is a phenomenon, but we don't need a god for it. Like it's just we look at everything going on, we're like, huh, why do humans act this way in these cultures? That's a good question. But to say, why do humans act this way in light of God? Like, that's just a ridiculous, unnecessary question. That's
Well, to
just,
me, that's like it's like saying we don't need gravity. This pin does what it does without gravity.
no, but it's not the same thing because gravity exists.
No, you can't prove gravity
Yes,
exists.
we can.
I'll give you the challenge. Okay, I'm going to give you the
We can.
challenge in the next 2, 3 minutes. Prove to me that gravity exists.
Drop the pen 15 times,
Well,
and the same thing will happen every time.
the pin drops by itself. It doesn't need gravity to do that.
Okay, well, I don't care what you call it. You don't have to call it gravity, but we can
Now
still.
you're using the arguments I've been using. I don't care what you call it. It's a phenomenon that's happening.
Okay, great. So
Okay.
then you agree that energy could be God.
At this point, possibly, yes.
All right. Well, I mean, dude, then that's a totally different story because I don't need to call it God, and neither do you. We can call it what science calls it, energy. We already have a name for it. But to call it God, that's very confusing because that's not what typically is known as God. So if we're going to agree that whatever we're talking about is this thing called energy because it's actually been proven to exist, then
Well,
let's just.
I don't know that God is energy. You said, could God be energy? And I said, yes, but I don't know. So
Well, no, what you don't know is God at all. You don't even know God exists.
right. In some ways I don't, but in some ways, everything I see seems to be consistent with that.
Well, everything seems to be consistent with you not necessarily knowing how to explain anything, and so you're calling it God. But
I
you
don't
would,
think, but me pointing to phenomena and saying these things happen and
and can be just as well explained by energy.
no, I didn't say that. Now that's not what I said. You
Okay.
said, could God be energy? And I said, yes, at this point in this thought process. But energy doesn't explain things like consciousness. It doesn't explain life. It doesn't explain the phenomena of humanity. It doesn't explain beauty, good, right,
Dude,
wrong,
who said it
evil.
does? Who said it
Right.
does?
I
But
didn't.
but it sounds like you're saying since energy doesn't explain it, it's got to be God.
No, I'm saying these are phenomena. And the
There are.
phenomena,
It's great. We can discuss phenomena, but all I'm saying is I don't mind being in the realm of I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. But what I mind is people coming at and saying, "Oh, but I know God exists because none of these other things explain it." Where's God coming in? Like, let's just pretend you never came up with God and God wasn't even an issue. We would be having the same conversation and we'd be saying, fascinating question. I don't know the answer. And we
but
would
that would
that.
but that would be like saying, let's pretend like every time I let go of the pin, it floats in the air. That's not what's happening. Okay. We're dealing with actual phenomena that is happening. Okay. Consciousness is not something I made up to prove God. It's a real thing that happens.
Sure.
Okay.
But it doesn't help in the case of it doesn't help in making a case for God either. It
I
just
think it does. I think it actually does. I
no, it
think,
just means we have a conscience and we don't know the answer to it yet. That's all that means.
well, it does mean that we are aware and conscious. And I will tell you this, and
Fine.
if you want to get into evidence consistent with God, and this is my wheelhouse, consciousness has no material explanation. Um, and reactions and MRIs of the brain, we can get into all that, but it's called the hard problem of consciousness. Consciousness is not a material phenomenon, not in the way we understand material. Um, and that doesn't immediately say, okay, slam dunk, that's Yahweh. But what it does say is these are phenomena that seem to be consistent with something. And the more information we're getting, the more the picture starts to be drawn out.
Well,
That
dude, and I'm fine with that, and I won't even try to argue with you in your wheelhouse because I mean that's not my specialty. I'm fine with saying I don't know, William. I bet you have far better explanations of this, but you've got a long ways to go to make it God, any God whatsoever. Like I don't know that you have any better answers to the explanation for conscience than science has for the creation and or not creation, but the existence of humanity. Like all we can say at this point is, huh, these are some tough questions. But bro, where do you come up with God? Like you would never have thought of that had it not been put into your head as a kid.
but I would also never thought about 2 + 2 = 4 if it had been put in my head, or the English language.
I
So
disagree because you have two fingers and two fingers. You'd have figured that out eventually. That's
no,
just,
I know people that don't know how to do math or don't know how to read and
I
write.
mean,
So
I'm not good at math, so I can't do
yeah,
all the big math, but I can do basic math, and I'd have figured that
sure.
out without a teacher.
But just because someone influenced me or taught me certain concept don't mean that doesn't mean there's not value to the concept. Um,
Well,
and
it might be value, but it doesn't mean it's true.
here's the problem from the opposite side of that. When I'm working toward this conclusion, I'm not making huge leaps. I'm making systematic, thought out steps forward. But along the way, you keep asking me, well, where's God? Where's God? Where's God? It's almost like I don't see a forest. All I see is a bunch of trees. And you've got to kind of look at this whole thing, and then you get the essence of it. But you're not going to get it at one point. This is it. This
And
is
I
God.
get that. And I get that. And I understand that. But I don't think you're taking steps forward. I think you're taking steps back. I think you're starting with God and you're coming back here and you're saying, what are the answers to these things? And you're doing everything that draws you back to the conclusion you already have. That's what apologetics does. You've already drawn the conclusion, and everything that points to it substantiates the conclusion you've already drawn.
But
And I'm
I don't think that's what I'm doing. I think the whole point along the way, and you said, you're being very honest. So I don't think I'm making those leaps. I think I'm making valid, solid, reasoned arguments forward
I
based
don't
on
think you're
what I
doing it on
see.
purpose. I am not arguing your integrity. Dude, you're most honest Christian, one of them. There's several like you, which blows my mind. So I very much appreciate your honesty and the conversation is wonderful. But and I don't think you're doing it on purpose. And I'm not trying to say you're being disingenuous. I'm saying I don't think you realize you're doing this, is my point. That's all I'm
I
saying.
don't think I'm doing it at all. I don't think because in no point so far have you said, does this prove Yahweh? Not one time have I said no. Have not said yes. It does. I've said no, not yet, not yet, not
Okay.
yet. And I will have to also say that when you throw that term out, Yahweh can be defined a lot of different ways. When I get to the point where I said, now I rest my case, Your Honor, this is my whole. It still may not be the concept of Yahweh that you're thinking about, because that can be defined by a lot of different things, right?
That's going to be a nightmare for you too, because the question's going to come down to who the hell is Yahweh?
Mm-hmm.
Because, bro, now you not only have to prove your Yahweh, but you have to demonstrate that the Yahweh you prove is the Yahweh all Christians believe, which, frankly, bro, I don't think that's even possible because I don't think there's a single person on the planet that agrees with all the things that you need to agree with to conclude the same Yahweh. Like, and that's another beef I have. I'm just like, where are you guys coming up with this? Like, it's just weird.
Mm-hmm.
I was there too. I had my own version of Yahweh, and I thought he was the only right Yahweh, and everybody needed to submit to my Yahweh.
Sure, sure.
Like, who is this Yahweh? And maybe that should be the next title of my book. Who is this Yahweh?
Who is this? Yeah, and you could probably be right about that. I read the writing of a guy by the name of Clark Strand many years ago, and he really had a lot of influence. He's a Buddhist, former Baptist, became Buddhist, but he said, wrote an article and said, the God that atheists don't believe in, I don't believe in either. And his argument was that a lot of the same sorts of contrived, naive sorts of definitions of God are things I don't also agree with. I think we're saying this Sunday school version of God. And I'm not knocking Sunday school, because when you're teaching sometimes concepts that are advanced, you do have to break them down and simplify them for people. But when we're really trying to ask these questions really seriously and really examine them and say, are they right? And I will say this, I'll tell you this at the end of this conversation, the extended conversation, I don't care. It's not my objective to bully you or anybody else into agreeing with me. The only thing I would hope is that at the end of the process, you can say, you know what, I don't agree with you maybe, but I do see why you say what you say. It's not irrational. It's not contrived. You didn't just decide I'm going to believe this and go with it. You did think it out, and I don't maybe agree with you, but I see where you draw your conclusions at, and that's good enough for me. I'm not interested in forcing anybody, you have to, I'm going to be so right that you're going to believe what I believe. I don't, Benjamin Franklin said, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. And you can't bully people into believing things, and you shouldn't. My objective is just say, this is the thought process that led me to where I'm at today. This is why I do that. And I don't think it's contrived. You don't have to agree with it, but it's not something I just made up or tried to blind my eyes to things. Hopefully I'm thinking the best I can with this. And I do think that if there was a point in time where I felt like that I believed atheism to be the best way to explain reality, I think I would have had the courage to go with that. I just don't think it gives the answers I needed for what I see in the world. And so it forced me to look other places for answers. And I eventually ended up where I'm at today. So I know we've talked and ran out of time here, but once again, this has been pretty fun, I think. Yeah.
Oh, it is, and we need to take some questions real quick before we go.
Yeah.
But just to wrap this up, no, I too would love to get to a point where I can feel understanding of why you think what you think, because that I'm still kind of baffled. And so I look forward to longer conversations in the future because I want to understand. I do. Uh, I, I don't even understand why I believed for as long as I did. So I'm even more curious to understand why you continue to believe. Um, but when you say atheism didn't give you the answers that you were looking for, I mean, bottom line is atheism doesn't give answers. That's what I keep trying to say. Atheism isn't a system. It doesn't provide answers. It simply says that isn't the answer, and that's it. And then whatever you do from there, we may seek answers, but it isn't a system. So I don't believe atheism provides answers. That isn't the point of atheism. And so I don't have any better answers than you do to the existence of everything. As an atheist, I'm journeying and trying to figure it out. But if you chose to not become an atheist because you didn't think it provided enough answers, then you didn't understand atheism because it doesn't provide answers. It just recognizes that theism isn't the answer. And that's where I ended up. I don't have all the answers. I just know theism isn't the answer because it has no substantial evidence for it whatsoever. And if the only evidence that one can come up with for the existence of God is that he has to come to you personally and give you faith and make you believe, then number one, he hasn't done that for me. And if he did, he's an asshole God because I believed for 40 years of my life and then he turned his back on me. So I'm sorry. I'm just done with that God because there's no answers there whatsoever. So I'm looking elsewhere. Hopefully, you and I can journey down this path and find something that answers these questions because it sounds to me like you weren't so sure that theism is the answer either, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you do.
Yeah,
And
no. You're hearing the question because I don't think it's fair to jump. I could tell you that I do believe that classical theism is probably the best answer that there is. But I don't want to just say that. I want to show you why I think that's the case. So,
and that's what we're going to do in the weeks
yeah,
to come. And I'm very much looking forward to it. So, William, while I'm looking through questions here for us, and anybody who wants to send a question, please do it. And we want to just talk about our books real quick, and then I'll get back to us. You want to talk about our books real quick?
yeah, sure. So those listening along, thank y'all for joining us today. It's been fun to have y'all here. The two books that we've both written, my book, The 10 Myths of Atheism, It deals with the sort of arguments we've been talking about today, kind of attacks those arguments. Alan's book, I think, is very interesting because I think Alan, bridging back to the article by Clark Strand, I think Alan talks a lot about a God I don't believe in either. I think, and he attacks a lot of bad thought processes and equally bad arguments that Christians put forth in defense of their view. So I think there's value in reading that book, if nothing else, to hear what he sees as extremely bad problems with the way some people frame their faith. So even if you may not read his book and agree with it, I'm sure many of you wouldn't, but I think there's a lot of value in reading that and understanding the thought process there. I think he put a lot of work into it, and he does relate very sincerely his experience. I think it's very valuable. So get a chance, buy those books, get them from Amazon, and that'll help you also follow these discussions a bit better, I think.
Thanks, William. That was great. So it doesn't look like we have any questions in the forum tonight, so there's not anything to answer. I did miss a question last week, apparently. My partner told me about it, so I'll just answer that now. The question was, why did I call my book How to Kill God the Easy Way? I know I've gotten a lot of criticism for that title, both from Christians and atheists. But to answer the question, number one, it's actually what the book's about. I know it sounds weird, but when you read it, you'll actually realize, oh, yeah, I can see why I called it that. It's just what the book's about. Secondly, I mean, I could have called the book something like Why I Left Christianity or something trite like that, but that's boring as hell. Who the hell is going to read a book like that? And frankly, who cares why I left Christianity? I don't think anybody cares. So, I mean, so I didn't want to call it something trite. So obviously I was looking for something more spectacular, something to create a shock effect, because to me, if you're going to read a book, you are going to judge it by its title, at least, maybe not by its cover. Although I think the cover is pretty impressive. Javier did a great job on it, but so, I wanted to call it, but most importantly, like what I was going for, like my thought process on it is that, as you know, William, the goal of my book was to remove the brainwashing that an addict has, because the only reason they're addicted to something is because they're brainwashed into thinking they love the substance or the product or even the emotional addiction that they have. And the only reason they do it is because they think it's great. And if you can remove that brainwashing, then suddenly it's like, oh, I don't even know why I like this, and it's just easy to walk away. It's not hard to not do something you don't want to do. So my thought process in titling in that was, the first step into removing the brainwashing is to diminish the value that anything has over you. So if I could create a title that people looked at, and over the course of time, hearing it over and over and over again, you diminish the value of God, where it was just like, oh, yeah, this guy thinks he killed God. God's no big deal. Or maybe he did kill God. You just create that question. My thought was, if you diminish that value, then you already began the removal of the brainwashing, so that as somebody reads it, they're no longer starting with the presupposition that God is mighty and strong. They're starting with a presupposition of, I wonder if the guy killed God. So that was kind of the idea I had. And obviously, I don't believe I'm killing the real God. I'm killing the idea of God, and that's the principle behind it. So that was why I called it that, to the questioner of last week, in case you're watching and you're interested. So that's, there's a number of reasons for that. So yeah, I mean, I could have called it something more boring, but I don't know. I kind of like the strike effect. Is it just it's more powerful, and I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure it's sold me a whole lot of more books, but I'm not sure why I left Christianity would have sold me anymore. So there you have it. But before we close out, we got 1 minute left, William. Yeah, why did you call your book the way you called it? While we're on the subject.
I think it was basically recurring arguments, and I thought it kind of aligned. The number 10 is kind of an easy number. I think I was probably trying to be provocative as well. I chose the title Myths of Atheism just because I knew it'd probably piss some atheists off and say, well, we don't have any myths, and maybe get them to actually read the book and engage the argument. So yeah, anybody that, if you've ever been in a bookstore, you don't buy the book that has the title that's boring and makes you want to yawn. You buy the one that seems like you might not know what's going on. So you're trying to create a little bit of a question there. What's happening in this book? And so yeah.
Absolutely. Well, next week Myth number three, science and faith are incompatible. That'll be an interesting discussion. So we're going to have some fun with that, William. I obviously we're expecting at some point to go more head to head. It's just going to happen. We did a little bit more tonight than we did last week, which is fine. And this is fun. And you're the kind of guy, I gotta tell you, dude, I like you so much that like even if we like battled it out to the death on a show, afterwards I'd be like, let's go grab a beer. It's like,
Yeah, no, yeah, I love the tough questions. I like to wrestle and I like to take
yeah.
the punches. I mean, because I don't like the cheap shots. I like doing this thing for real. Let's work it out. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, dude, and you're just a great guy. I cannot tell you still how much I appreciate the fact that we had a chance to get offline and converse because I feel like I made a true friend in you and I'm grateful for your friendship. So, I will see you next Sunday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern for round three. Everybody, have a great night. See you all next week. Good night, Vincent.
Night.